Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming today. Some people obviously have had a particular invite, others have come for other reasons, and that's most welcome, so thank you for that. And what we'll do is, we'll do introductions in a short while, but we'll just cover some housekeeping first. Bearing in mind that one of our colleagues will be joining us soon, she's recovered from the little fall, so there'll be no issues there either. Right, housekeeping. The fire alarm, a fire practice is not expected. If the alarm does sound, though, can all present leave the building as quickly as possible by way of the nearest exit. The designated assembly point is in the public square in front of Cast, beyond the fountain, and that's away from the civic office. If there's anybody with mobility issues, please wait in the refuge area at the top of the stairs where the emergency evacuation lift is located, and use the intercom situated to the left-hand side of the lift doors to call for assistance. No roll call will be undertaken. Thank you. Mobile phones, if you could ask everyone to ensure your mobile phones are switched to silent mode, please. As you are already aware, this meeting will be audio-visually recorded and will be available to view on the Council's website and YouTube channel. Can I ask all those present to use their microphones to ensure the audio can be captured? Any members of the public entering the Council chamber are accepting that their images will be retained and broadcast by the Council. Of course.
Apologies. There is a fire alarm test at 11. I forgot it were a Friday. So, my fault. So, just be aware, please. Thank you.
Jane, that will when that fire alarm goes, obviously 15 minutes and then you'll be going, so that'll be a good reminder. Right, if any member of the public or press is intended to record or film any part of today's meeting, please ensure that this does not disturb the conduct of the meeting. Apologies for absence. Any apologies for absence, Caroline?
Not received any apologies, Chair.
I think the only one I've received is from John Reid. He's not very well, so Godspeed to him. Item 2, consider the extent, if any, to which the public and press are to be excluded from the meeting. There is nothing to consider with regarding item 2. Item 3, declarations of interest, if any. If you have any interest, please declare this and a form will need to be completed following the meeting. Please contact Caroline, who can assist you with the process. Item 4, minutes from the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee held on the 25th of September 2025. Can we agree those minutes are in order? I'll proceed and be signed and seconded, please. Can anybody? Thank you. Item 5, public statements. There's nobody in, so we can skip that. Okay, moving on to item 6, which is today's business. Doncaster Delivering Together, otherwise known as DDT, Borough Strategy Refresh, and it's pages 19 to 30. Introductions can be made here now, please. Can I just ask the officers in attendance just to make yourself known to us, please? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alan Wiltshire. I'm Service Director for Policy, Economic Development and Environmental Sustainability.
Hi, morning everyone. Lee Tillman, Exec Director, Policy Partnerships and Investment.
Morning everybody, I'm Sarah Abbots. I'm a Service Manager for Policy and Partnerships.
Thank you very much. In fact, that's everyone on our list, so thank you for that. I'd like to now hand back over to the officers to introduce the item, and I believe that there will be a presentation today. Is that correct? Okay, over to you, Alan.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to try and just take you through a few things today. What I'd like to get out of this presentation today, which complements the paper which you've had as part of today's session, is a bit of a recap on kind of the reasons for the refresh for our kind of borough strategy, a little bit, and I will move quite quickly over the engagement information. I think I've done that a few times, both at the informal session and other places, but I will cover that. I'll talk about the outline framework for the borough strategy, and will also be part of a discussion, comments, recommendations from yourselves as part of the session. And I want to kind of finish with some next steps in terms of how we're going to take this forward along with the relationship between the borough strategy and the corporate plan. Those are the things that I'd love to get out of today's session. So just as a bit of a recap, I'd like to start with what is Team Doncaster. So the borough strategy is a partnership strategy. And when in Doncaster, we call that Team Doncaster. I want to be really clear about what that is. That is an umbrella term that we use for all that partnership activity that happen across our place. So if you think of some of the agencies that work across Doncaster alongside the council, that might be Job Centre Plus, that might be the prisons, that might be the Chamber of Commerce, that might be the hospital. All of those organisations together make up Team Doncaster because we are all working together for Doncaster. That is not a statutory function, so we don't have to have it. We choose to have it because it makes a difference. Having a partnership and having organisations work closely in this way is something that we have always invested our time in Doncaster. And Team Doncaster is a very mature partnership that has been going for over a decade. Some local authority areas no longer have a strategic partnership. Here in Doncaster, we think it's incredibly important. I want to make that really clear. That's something that's a strength for Doncaster. In addition to that, some of our partnership activities, some of our partnership panels are statutory panels. So some of you might be aware of the Health and Wellbeing Board. Every local authority area must have a Health and Wellbeing Board. Some of you will be aware of Safer Doncaster Partnership, which is our community safety partnership. Every local authority area has to have a community safety partnership. So there are elements of our partnership which we must have, but we see it as much broader and bigger, and it's why we refer to it as Team Doncaster. Within Team Doncaster, we think there's a number of things that it should do as a successful partnership. So part of it is around making sure that it has assurance for delivery and it can see what it's trying to do, what it's trying to achieve, and make sure it gets there. So that's one of the first functions of a partnership. The second thing is I've already mentioned around some of those partnership boards, and I've mentioned two in terms of the Health and Wellbeing Board and then the Safer Doncaster Partnership. But there are others as well that operate across Doncaster where it makes sense to bring agencies together to deliver things. The third thing we do is we have something called Horizon Policy Design Group, and that's something some of you I know have attended, but it's something that we kind of have on a monthly basis to make sure we try and connect people as best we possibly can. If you think about all the people that work and all the agencies that work in Doncaster, making sure that we connect up and know what each other's doing is really, really important. And so that's something that we kind of do as well. And then finally, we try to communicate and network as well. So actually, we try the power we have of communication just from council communications, but also in terms of hospital and those other agencies, is really, really important that we do that together. And finally, I know some people in this room attended the Team Doncaster Summit this year, and again, that's something where we bring people together physically in person because we think it's important that people have a chance to look at what's happening in Doncaster and to connect, to understand and see that. And that's something we do, again, as Team Doncaster Partnership. These are just the logos of some of the agencies that are part of Team Doncaster. And again, hopefully it shows the breadth of which we try to make sure we're inclusive and make sure those agencies that are making a difference across Doncaster are all coming together. So I want to move on now. So why are we refreshing a borough strategy? Why do it? Why now? So the first thing is we're approaching the halfway point. So this was first agreed in 2021. If I take you back to 2021, you were all probably sitting in rooms somewhere with your families and not being able to go out. So it was devised in a place where time was quite different. And here we are 5 years on. We think it's time to have a look at that context again, make sure it's right, make sure it's fit for purpose for Doncaster. Because we need to make sure it's relevant for people. We need to make sure it's current, it's relevant for our residents, it's also relevant for our businesses as well. It's a new mayoral term, so again, it makes sense in terms of making sure that it's kind of fit and right and aligned with that. And also, as we're going to find out over the next couple of months, we're in a kind of more settled picture in terms of we'll have hopefully a longer term view of our finances over the next kind of 3 to 4 years. But the key thing is we set out to achieve something by 2030. That's what we set out to achieve. And here we are at the end of 2025. This is our opportunity to really focus in and say, what are we going to deliver? What are we all going to get to in 2030 and make sure that we've got over the line? So this is a refresh, but it's a chance to hone in on what matters and what we're really going to get behind and deliver. Because we're halfway through, we're not starting from zero. We've not just cooked this up and thought, I know, let's have a borough strategy. There's been an awful lot of work that's happened over the last 4 or 5 years to help us get to where we are. And there's things on there which I'm not going to go through all of those things, but there are things that have happened over the last 5 years during the time of our existing borough strategy, which I think we should be proud of. Things like city status, for example, things like £1.2 billion worth of investment into the borough in that time. These are things that we need to build on. These are strengths that we have that we want to continue to build on. But there's more to do. All of those things you've just read on that screen there are things which I think that we should be proud of, but there is more to do. Sorry.
Alan, sorry for interrupting you. I am mindful that that screen's not working properly. This one's at such an angle that some of the members can't see it properly. If anybody can't read that properly, please feel welcome to move now into a position where you can. When this presentation's finished, you can come back to where you were. So, are you okay? You're all right. Okay.
So, sorry about that. I didn't
No,
realise
no,
it was.
I know.
I was looking at that one. I didn't realise that was.
It's obviously over there. The sideways deflection is quite.
Yeah. No. Appreciate that.
Right. Thank.
Is it okay? Is everyone okay? Right. Okay. So developing our borough strategy this year. So we've established we've got a strong partnership. We're building on things that we've done over the last 5 years. We know that actually want to hone in on delivery for 2030. That's where we want to get to. There are a number of things that we know we need to build into our borough strategy going forward. One of those things is local voice. So we're going to speak about that as part of our engagement when I go through in a little bit. Part of that is there is lots of existing strategy work that's happening already. So again, there's lots of stuff that is happening across the borough that's really, really important. For example, our city centre strategy was only agreed recently. That's something that's existing, that's got a plan. We need to take account of that. We've got our plans across South Yorkshire. Again, we need to align to things that are happening across South Yorkshire. National stuff happens. National policy has changed since 2021. We need to make sure we take account of that. And we ourselves have got policy positions, how we want to work locally that matters to us. So all of those things matter when we're thinking about how we're going to develop our borough strategy going forward. So there's lots of inputs and things that we need to think about in order to get this borough strategy right. This is our existing frame. So remember, this is a halfway point refresh. So we're not kind of starting from scratch. This is our halfway point refresh. So this here is what we've currently got. So on the top right there, we've got our kind of wheel, if you like, and those are our kind of goals, if you like, for 2030. So at the heart of that is thriving people, places and planet, and around that are kind of our goals that we want. We want to be skilled and creative. We want to be prosperous and connected. But just me saying that, or just you saying that, doesn't get us to where we want to get to, which is why we have a set of 8 priorities, things that we can deliver against in order to make sure we get where we want to get to by 2030. So we want to develop skills that enable people to thrive in life and work. We want to be able to develop people's skills. That's one of the ways we can ensure we are more prosperous and connected by the time we get to 2030. So that's our frame that we're planning to keep and establish. This is a halfway point refresh. This is the frame that we're working with. And I want to move on to the engagement findings, and I will move through this quite quickly. So we had a big neighbourhood conversation. So the results of that, I think we've gone through informally and at different arenas. We engaged with over 5,000 residents, and we also had over 1,400 community conversations. So that's face-to-face conversations out in people's areas and communities over the summer period. Part of what people were telling us, there was a couple of things. Part of what they were saying this was we asked 4 questions. One was around, what do you like about where you live? And then there was a series of questions about what would you improve first, and what would you improve over the long term. This focuses on what would you like to improve. So things like safety, cleanliness and the infrastructure of the place, feeling of safety and crime prevention, road conditions, public spaces, youth engagement, housing development, you can read the rest on there. Those were some of the things that came out quite strongly. And if you remember the previous slide where I said the inputs into the borough strategy, local voice was one of those inputs which we think is really important. So that we will make sure that what people tell us find their way into our borough strategy, because it's important that what residents tell us is important end up in our strategy. But it's not just the big neighbourhood conversation that had 5,000 responses. There are several other engagements that we have. So an age-friendly survey, over 1,000 people targeted at older population to get their views. The big city conversation, which was just about the city centre, had over 8,000 respondents. The community safety strategy, over 3,000 respondents. The culture strategy, 939 respondents. The food plan, 1,600 people responded to that. So what I'm trying to get a picture of is that we did do a big neighbourhood conversation which had 5,000 residents, but we didn't stop there in terms of thinking about what is it that people are telling us. We want to build on all of these things and able to get a fuller picture as we possibly can. That's quite difficult, because just doing the maths on there, you can start to add up the amount of questionnaires and surveys that we've got to work with. So what we've done is we've tried to build all of that together, and we've tried to, that looks a little bit blurry on the screen to me, but what we've tried to do is try to distill out what are some of the things that are coming from all of that engagement, what does that tell us, and what are people really vocal about and feel like we should consider going forward. And what we've got here is we've kind of put all of those findings under those 8 priorities that I spoke about. So, you know, for example, if I look to the bottom right quadrant, which is opportunities for healthier, happier lives, you can see there issues with GPs and NHS dentistry, access, long waits for secondary care, barriers, cultural awareness, digital access, concerns about housing conditions, importance of walking routes, you know, things like that which people are telling us. And again, there's a lot of work gone into that, but this is just a summary to show you some of the things that's coming out from some of those findings. And we've carried on with that with the other 4 priorities, so the 8 priorities in total, those bullet points against each one of those we've tried to consider. So we're trying to do our best we possibly can to ensure when residents are telling us something, whether it's a big neighbourhood conversation, a community safety strategy conversation, whatever it is, we're trying to kind of suck that in so that we can take account of it when we're developing our strategy. And like I said, that is no mean feat in being able to do that. So we are really trying our best to do that as best we can. So hopefully I've set that up. What I want to do now is talk about what would a borough strategy look like then. So what would be some of the key parts and component bits of it. So we think there's kind of 5 bits to it. So the first bit is our kind of introduction and outline, which is kind of a little bit what I've already said. You know, we started this in 2021. Some of the things we really wanted to achieve by 2030 still feels really important, but it feels like we've got 4 years left. 4 years to get to where we said we want to get to by 2030. How do we really focus in on delivery? How do we really kind of all come together to deliver some of those key things that really matter for people, really matter for businesses? So it's really important that we set that up as best we possibly can. What's also clear is there's some big things that have come out from all of that engagement and some of the feedback we had at the informal session as well that seem really, really important. So one of those things is economic growth, making sure that we deliver on some of that. Now, that you can take that right from national policy all the way from locally about actually growing our local economy in a good, inclusive way makes a difference. So we think that's our first one that we think we should consider. The second one is our city centre. And again, actually there's a lot in that and we'll unpack that in a little bit. But again, the strength of responses just from the big city centre conversation, which had 8,000 responses. Some of the conversations we've had in this chamber before about the importance of the city centre, again, feels like one of those things that feels really important that we need to consider and elevate. The third thing was around neighbourhood renewal. And again, I got a real strength of feeling from our informal session about making sure that we deliver in our neighbourhoods the things that people expect of us. So that's around services, That's around opportunities that we've got as things around Pride in Place, which are government policy around, additional funding in our neighbourhoods across the borough. All of those things wrapped up together feel really important that we'd want to elevate. And the final one was around learning and culture. And again, that sense of people's skills, people's understanding and people's ability to access those skills and qualifications, along with people's pride about the heritage of the place, again, came through really, really strongly. The third bit here is making sure, I spoke at the start about the number of organisations across Team Doncaster. So I spoke about the college, I spoke about Job Centre Plus, I spoke about the hospital, the Chamber of Commerce, those logos we saw on that screen. Actually, it's really important that as a partnership, they can see themselves in this strategy. So what we're really keen for, against those 8 priorities, making sure that the partners and the council set out some key deliverable things that we want to get done by 2030 against each one of those. So that almost acts as our coverage, if you like, making sure that each partner or organisation can say, actually, what's really important to me is to really deliver that. And it gives us a way to capture some of those in things by 2030. The fourth thing is about how we'll go about doing this. So again, really important that the what is important, so what we're going to do. How we go about it is going to be equally as important. Making sure that we do things with residents, not to residents. Making sure that we make the most of technology and the advantages of AI. How we do stuff, how we go about it, is just as important as what. So we think it's important to have a section around that. And then finally, how do we know if anything we've done made a difference? And that's around some of our outcomes measures. So are we measuring and are we having an impact out there through some of the measures that we've got? This is a really important slide for me because this is the essence of the borough strategy. This is how it's going to be set out. And I'm going to talk a bit more about each bit of those elements now. But that's the kind of flow that we think works for the borough strategy. And again, as we get into this, it'll be important to hear your views on that. So I want to talk about why these big collaborations. I've touched on them a little bit, but I wanted to make sure there was a slide on there to back that up. So making sure that the things that we're really elevating, these, at the moment, we're calling them big collaborations. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but big things that we want to really get behind. 4 things that we can all remember. I reckon if I turned that slide up, I could remember those 4 things. And that's important. Important that we are all joined up as a partnership with stuff that we can really focus on together. So I will go through very quickly, but I think I've said quite a bit of this already. But actually, that economic growth is really, really important. You know, there's things in there around the airport and the opportunity the airport provides, but there's also something around housing growth. We've got high housing delivery targets, and housing growth is, again, a way to improve some of the economy as well. City centre, I've spoken at a big city conversation. Crime and safety perceptions within the city centre at people wanting to spend time there. And we've also got key investment sites in the city centre as well. You can just about see it through your window, Gateway 1, the steelwork through the window there. You know, and there are other sites in the city centre as well. Transforming our city centre is really, really important as part of this big collaboration. Neighbourhood renewal, I've spoken about that in terms of the responses and also the pride in place. But it's something, again, that I picked up really strongly from the informal session that you felt really important. That was something we needed to elevate, something we needed to highlight. And then finally, the learning and culture bit as well. And again, I'd highlight some of the things in there. So for each one of those, what we're starting to get to grips with is what have we achieved and what might some of those delivery milestones be. And these are just draft. They're not kind of finalised, but we're starting to think about, well, what would you pull together underneath an economic growth kind of area? And you can see the blue box starts to kind of pick some of those out. So again, you'd want to kind of elevate those key investment sites. You'd want to make sure that we were delivering against our housing delivery targets. You'd want to make sure that some of those big infrastructure changes, so things, the potential we've got at junction 3 of M18. All of those things actually start to think, well, actually, if we delivered those and we delivered against those, that would have a big impact on the borough. And that's what we talk about when we talk about these suggested key delivery milestones. Quite high, quite strategic, big stuff that we want to get right in our strategy. Almost things you could tick off. So by the time we get to 2030, I'm a little bit grayer in the hair. I can look back and say, we did this, we ticked that off. Moving on to the city centre one, and again, it's the same kind of format of the slide. And again, in 2030, instead of looking out there and seeing the steelwork going up, actually you'll see a vibrant AI and tech hub operating within our city centre. That's the kind of things that we want to vision and deliver as part of our borough strategy. Neighbourhood renewal, again, there's lots of things and opportunities that we've got here. Part of what I'll elevate here is, again, the government announcements for the Pride in Place in Mexborough, Conisbrough and Rosington of 20 million over 10 years. What a fantastic opportunity that is in those communities. But it's not just about that. There are other opportunities that we've got right across the borough that we can use. This will be a neighbourhood renewal programme across the borough. And again, you can imagine just looking at some of those things there, the scale of that across the borough can be really impactful, something we could really all, again, get behind and push forward together. And then learning and culture as well. And again, there's some fantastic things that we've achieved, some things like the Remake Learning Festival, which engaged over 10,000 people in learning activities to inspire young people and to support people of all ages to fall in love again with learning. How fantastic is that, and how can we build on that? I think we're the first place in the UK to ever do something like that. But there's much more than that as well, and there's a whole range of things that matter to people. Again, we're hearing quite strongly around people's heritage and people wanting to, elevate and support the heritage of Doncaster and the assets that we've got across Doncaster as well. I'm not going to go through the Great 8 priorities, but I do think it's important, that section 3, that coverage. So against each one of those, I would expect some kind of delivery things. So, against building, transport and digital connections, I would expect to see some key deliverables against each one of those in the borough strategy. How do we want to work? So I've spoken a little bit about those big 4 collaborations. I've mentioned the Great 8 priorities and want to make sure there's some key deliverable things against each one of those. This is how we want to work. So we want to be collaborative and relational. So what that means is actually, I spoke about the partnerships. Working in partnerships is really, really important. So how we're being collaborative and work is really important. But also that relational aspect. How do we relate to people? How do we build on the relationships with our residents, with our businesses, so that actually we can support people in the best possible way by building on those relationships and having that relational approach. Making sure we're focused on residents, making sure that that is our, part of what we do. Everything we do, that's part of our focus. And I think that's what we do. But again, I think as part of our borough strategy, we would want to state that and make sure that we're clear about that. We want to be proactive and preventative. So actually we want to take a whole life, whole system approach. But what does that mean? That means that we want to make sure we look at everything in the round. We don't just do things in silos or one small thing. And also, actually, we want to help people as early as we possibly can. Intelligence-led and adaptive. So again, we use data all the time. If you use your phones for anything now, there is data and algorithms running left, right, and centre. You know that, I know that. How do we make the most of our data? How do we ensure that we make the most of the artificial intelligence and the benefits that can bring? That's not to say we use it for everything and anything, but we use it where it makes sense, and we use it to make a difference. Regenerative and future focused. That means we must think about what are some of the decisions we're making now and how does that impact the future. So it might, there is always that, I suppose, conversation about this might be good for the short term, but is it good for the long term? And having those kind of conversations. And then finally, we want to be innovative and inclusive. So actually, I want Doncaster to be a place where actually we do think about doing things differently, and we maybe do spearhead new ways of working or new technologies or whatever it is, because that matters, because that's how we're going to make sure we're productive and we deliver against the things that we want to. So that's how we're setting out to work. And then I suppose the final bit of the borough strategy needs to be about outcome measures. So outcome measures are things that we want to make sure we're monitoring over a significant period of time. So some outcome measures you might kind of say, yeah, okay. So the outcome measures are measures we want to track over time. So things might be like healthy life expectancy. Actually, we want that to increase, right? Or employment rate. We want that to increase, right? But actually, those things tend not to move around quickly. You don't see big jumps in healthy life expectancy. You see either changes or trends over time. So we want to make sure that we're tracking that and making an impact and difference on that. And the other thing I will say is, who is accountable for healthy life expectancy? Who's responsible to improve healthy life expectancy? The honest answer is, it's everybody's job. There's a shared responsibility. There's a personal responsibility. There's a partnership responsibility. Most of the outcome measures that we're talking about here is not, something you'd set a target for a council to deliver. Council can contribute, for sure. Council have programmes to deliver, to support that, for sure, but not all of it in its entirety. And that's why I come back to the partnership being really important. Working together to make a difference against these outcomes is the way we want to do things. And then the final thing I suppose I'll say on this is that we do, and we have done, annual reviews. So Doncaster put together annual reviews where we take stock of what have we done and delivered in that year. And again, what we've done is this is just taken directly from the annual report. So again, we've got our outcome measures. So this is in the public domain, has been for a year. These are things where we kind of say, how are we doing? How are we doing over the 5 years? How are we doing compared to national average? Are we narrowing the gap? And we do track those outcomes over time. And that's something that's important for us to do. Just in terms of the council's contributions, so actually we have a borough strategy which kind of goes to 2030, but we also have a corporate plan that is refreshed every year. And our corporate plan is more specific things that the council's going to do. So the borough strategy sets out to 2030. That's where we want to be by 2030. Every year, our corporate plan and our budget get agreed. And that's the things we will deliver that year that contributes and it helps us take the next step towards that 2030 vision. And it's really important to understand the relationship between the borough strategy and the corporate plan. Now, I said about outcome measures in the borough strategy, things that we want to change over time for partnerships. So things like healthy life expectancy. I don't think you should set like a target for healthy life expectancy or hold any one person accountable for healthy life expectancy. But in the corporate plan, you might say, well, how many people have we put through a quit smoking service? That is something we can help with. That is something we could maybe set a target against. And that is something that we could get right. And if we got that bit right, that contributes to healthy life expectancy. And so understanding the difference is really, really important. Also, as a committee, you will have the quarterly finance and performance report. You will see that every quarter, which details the corporate plan's performance measures, so you can see how the council is doing against its performance measures, which contribute to the borough strategy. So every quarter you have an opportunity to see it and to ask questions and to support performance improvement. And I just really think it's really important to make that link between the borough strategy, the corporate plan, and the performance reporting that this committee sees on a regular basis. Finally, Chair, this is the final slide now. There's some timescales coming up in terms of what happens next. I mentioned it's the it's a partnership borough strategy, so on the 9th of December, we'll be going to the Team Doncaster executive, which is the partnership meeting, to talk around the borough strategy. And then you will see early in the new year, there will be a cabinet, and it will ultimately come to full council for approval as part of the council's policy and budgetary framework. And following that, the corporate plan will follow shortly afterwards, as is right and proper, as I've just described, with the borough strategy defining where we want to be by 2030 in a partnership sense, and a corporate plan describing the council's contribution over a one-year period coming shortly afterwards. And I think, again, just want to really labour the point about that relationship. Partnership strategy, borough strategy, 2030. Corporate plan, 1 year, council contribution to that borough strategy, both of which are coming forward in the new year, but in the right sequence. Borough strategy first, setting out to 2030, then a corporate plan, setting out our 1 year contribution. All of that information, Chair, hopefully complements what was in the paper and adds to it. But today, myself and officers happy to take any questions or comments on any of that or what's on the paper.
Alan, thank you very much for that. It certainly does. Lee, do you want to add anything to that? Sarah, anything to that? Thank you. It makes it really good because the questions we're going to now be asking are pertinent to what we've just seen. So it's now allowed us to focus on the question aspect of it. What I'd like to say, please, is I'll be mindful of time all the time as we're going through this. I'm going to prioritise the OSMC committee questions first because we've sat down and pre-planned those. I will, when we've finished, give you an indication of how much time is left for other questions from other members. And I'll give you certainly try and give you the best slot we can if you've got any questions as well before we draw the meeting to a close. So if you just allow us to progress through our questions first, please. It may well answer some of the questions you've got anyway. I hope it does. So what we'll do is I'll start off with the very first question, if that's all right. And it's just some of it, reasonably concise, but how does the borough strategy now align? Now, I'm talking about now because some of the information on there is not exactly up to date, is it? It's making reference over the past 12 months at least. So how does the borough strategy now align with the council's corporate plan for 25-26 and the medium-term financial strategy, given that the financial context and service pressures have significantly changed since the strategy's launch in 2021?
Thanks, Chair. I'll answer this. So in terms of the borough strategy that we've had from 2021, that's obviously informed each year the corporate plan that's gone through. So last year in February, March, the corporate plan was signed off and that showed the council's contribution in 25-26 to the existing borough strategy. What we'll now see, as Alan set out, is from January, once the borough strategy is subject to it being approved, that will then inform the council's corporate plan from 26-27. So we'll be able to see that direct sort of line of sight, if you like, from what's in the borough strategy to what we would contribute as a council. And then the things that you would see in the budget and in the medium-term financial strategy would seek to support and address some of the issues that are in the borough strategy. So, for example, some of our capital investment in our capital programme will support the ambitions that are set out in the borough strategy, whether that's things like leisure centres, whether it's things like our city centre regeneration or other things, estate roads or highway investment, for example. So that's how that alignment sort of is set out.
What I'll do, I'll always come to you as well. I'll give you the opportunity to add anything. If you say no, we'll move on. Yep, good. A quick follow-up. Are there any elements of what we've seen so far been deprioritised or delayed as a result of what's gone so far?
I think what we tried to do is try to be kind of adaptive because circumstances change, new opportunities arise, or things we have to take account of. So I think that slide that I'll show with all the different inputs is quite helpful because we're trying to manage lots of things, aren't we? What our local picture is, what local residents are saying, what opportunities there are locally, changes to national government policy, for example, or things that change at a regional level. I mean, one example is obviously the airport closed over the last couple of years. That was a big change for us in terms of where we were previously. So we try to be kind of adaptive. And I think that the opportunity or the The challenge for us really with the borough strategy is if we're focused on broadly the direction of travel that we're heading in and the things that we want to do, so like growing the economy, helping people with skills, improving the conditions in our communities, if we focus on that, whatever comes at us, we can adjust, if that makes sense, and we can be quite agile about how we respond and make the best of the resources that we've got and the capacity that we've got to focus on those things.
Thanks, Lee. I've got on here, as you would expect, last year's as a theme going through it about gain share. This one doesn't seem to have any theme going through it about gain share.
But what have you got there, Steve? Is it the corporate plan or the?
I've got last year's Doncaster delivering together.
Is that the investment plan?
It's the investment plan.
Yeah. So thanks, Steve. So what we have that supports the borough strategy and our corporate plan is an investment plan, and I think we last updated it in 2024. And what that sets out is a set of, because we have to sort of knit together lots and lots of different initiatives and lots of different funding streams from all sorts of different places, some nationally, some locally, some regionally. And what the investment plan attempted to do was to try and bring that together and show how that was being used or proposed to be used. What we've not done since 2024 is update it, because we're going to update it on an annual basis. So what I would expect to happen in 2026 is we would update that investment plan in light of the new borough strategy and the new realities, because we've got a number of things that we now have or that have changed since then. So for example, Al's mentioned Pride in Place. We've got those 3 Pride in Place areas. There's been extra investment in leisure facilities, for example. There's other resources that are coming. So that investment plan would then be updated, and that would include gain share, and obviously subject to decisions that are made over the next few weeks. And in the budget and in the capital programme, that investment plan would reflect that updated reality. So yeah, it would change over time depending on where we're at.
Very quick one, sorry. It's Pride in Place. Was it not levelling up funding?
So there's a few things there. So there's been a number of different national funding streams over the last few years. So we had Levelling Up Fund round 1, Levelling Up Fund round 3, which Doncaster was successful in getting both of those. There was something called the Long-Term Plan for Towns, which then changed to, I can't remember what it was called, Community, I can't remember, it was another name, and is now Pride in Place. So one of those was from the previous government, and that's been rolled forward, called Pride in Place round 1. Subsequent to that, Doncaster's got 3 more of those, which is called Pride in Place Phase 2, and that's 3 lots of 20 million. So in total, Doncaster will get 4 lots of 20 million. One of those was earmarked under the previous government, and 3 are from this government, and they're all now badged Pride in Place. And then there's a couple of others that we'll be expecting some news on soon. Something called Community Regeneration Partnership, which is a 20 million capital fund focusing on the city centre. So as you can see, there's lots of things that come at us the names change and they come at us at different times. Our job is to try and match all that, if you like, to the plan. So that's, I guess, the importance of having a plan. We can try and stick to it and be flexible about when the resources come and in what form the resources come.
Thank you, Lee. What we'll do is move on to question 2, and I'll hand over to Councillor Kidd for that.
Thank you. Can you describe how the very localised neighbourhood plans interact with the borough strategy? Are there likely to be any tensions due to some different priorities? Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, so I think I would describe it as a golden thread. So we've got the borough strategy, which sets out the things that we want to try and achieve at a city-wide level. And as the proposed borough strategy sets out, we've then got a very strong focus on neighbourhoods and communities in that strategy. And then the theory and the plan and the reality is that we then translate that to what does that actually mean in the context of Mexborough, or what does that mean in the context of the city centre, or what does that mean in the context of Thorne and Moor Ends. So as far as we possibly can with the resources we've got, we tailor what does that mean and what do residents tell us, those plans to meet the needs in particular communities and neighbourhoods. And I mentioned about that, the different funding streams. So what we have to try and do is match those funding streams and the opportunities we have to what those particular community opportunities or needs are. So things like some of the transport funding in Mexborough, for example, is an example of that. Pride in Place, again, I've mentioned, so we'll use that resource that comes in to help to support what residents have said in Rosington or in Mexborough or in Conisbrough and Denby. So it's a constant balancing act to try and do that. As well as the additional resources we get, what we're also increasingly trying to do is, and this comes back to the Team Doncaster point, how can partners work together flexibly to meet the needs of a particular community through those local plans? Because this is where I think the sort of magic, if you like, of Team Doncaster comes in, because if we just relied on what central government told each of the government departments, you just get lots of sort of siloed approaches, whereas if we can work together at a partnership level in a place to meet that needs, it's better for residents, but it's also better for those organisations because they get better value for money and better outcomes for residents. That's not always easy, to be really honest, because each of the government departments has still got the strings that it's trying to pull in terms of the things that it expects NHS, for example, to do, or DWP to do. So we're trying to operate within the flexibility that we have to try and achieve that.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor, good, thank you.
What is the governance mechanism that ensures Team Doncaster partners are held to account for delivery against the 6 well-being goals, and how are OSMC and Audit Committee involved in that oversight structure?
Thanks, Steve. So I suppose the first thing to maybe to iterate is it's not statutory to have a partnership and to have a plan like this. It used to be probably 15 years ago, but a lot of councils made a decision in places that they didn't need it or they did away with it. A lot of those councils are now trying to build them back because they realise how important it is, and there's very few things, if anything, that one organisation, whether it's the council or any, can do on their own. So I think what's positive is we've continued to invest in that. It's never a perfect thing, but it's something that we've continued to invest in. And we've been recognised as a place through things like the Local Government Association peer review of the strengths in our partnership. And as again on the slides, we talked about relationships, and the strength of the partnership is built on that, because we can't mandate each other to do something. We have some statutory partnerships like Safer, Stronger Doncaster and Health and Wellbeing Board, but we can't tell each other what to do, if that makes sense. So it's got to rely on trust, it's got to rely on shared objectives, it's got to rely on what's in it for me. So if I'm the NHS and I need to try and keep people out of hospital, well, I want to invest and make sure that activity in communities is going to help to prevent people coming into hospital. Likewise with the police in terms of crime prevention or antisocial behaviour. So that's the context. But that said, what we do have is we have a Team Doncaster executive. It meets every quarter. And every part of Team Doncaster produces an annual assurance statement, which says, if you're Safer, Stronger Doncaster, I'll use that as an example, these are the things we're doing, Safer, Stronger Doncaster, these are the things we expect to achieve, and this is the help we might need from other partners. So that's one mechanism. You've got the assurance statements. The other thing which Team Doncaster's done much more in the last probably 2 years is focused in and said, right, what are the things we're really going to work on together across Doncaster? So one of them was a focus on the city centre. Another was the focus on that neighbourhood working that we're doing. So it's using those kind of mechanisms. And then I guess in terms of, and all of the partners have their own accountability regimes as well. So NHS is accountable to Department of Health and Social Care, etc. We're obviously accountable to MHCLG. So everyone's got those, but it's by working together, you can achieve your outcomes together. In terms of the role of OSMC and Audit Committee, well, I think, again, as we said, the corporate plan gives us a really good mechanism, because that sets out what we're doing as a council to contribute to the borough strategy through the corporate plan. And obviously OSMC reviews progress every quarter, and we come and talk about the quarterly report. Other parts of Scrutiny will focus on other parts of the partnership. So Health Scrutiny, for example, or Children and Young People Scrutiny will then bring other partners in as part of that. So there's not one accountability mechanism, but there are several. I suppose it's just reinforcing that we don't have that control as a partnership on each other. It's very much built on those relationships and that trust.
Thanks, Lee. I mean, I attended that last meeting, as you know.
Yeah.
And I think what we found in there, that there were a lot of goals that were set with the goals weren't being achieved. And it was felt that some of these things sometimes were a bit of a tick boxing exercise. But who is ultimately, who's the accountable officer for the performance framework that ties partnerships to it all? Who's the officer that pulls it all together?
So within the framework that we have, I guess you could say that's me from a council point of view. But I would say that we don't have the mandate to compel any partner to do anything. It's all about the trust and the relationships that we have to work together, because people see what's in it for them. So I think what we have, which I would compare to other local authorities that we've seen, and a lot of local authorities ask us about our arrangements, I think we make the best arrangement that we can out of the accountability that we have at our disposal. And things like some of the stuff that Al's put up, and the annual report, and showing the performance of outcomes, because again, we can't deliver outcomes, we can contribute to outcomes, or we can make it harder to achieve outcomes. All the partners are working together to improve those things. So I think when you talk about services, I think it's easier to say accountability for delivering X. But when you talk about some of the things we're trying to achieve as a city, it's very hard. It's not easy to say, well, that one thing, or that one person, or that one team, or that one organisation is accountable for healthy life expectancy, because it doesn't work like that, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Still on. Yeah, Antoinette.
Just one thing there. So I think you're trying to say you're more of a conductor than a director.
What a great analogy, Antoinette. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Still on it's following on to this. It's about performance measurement, and I'll hand across to my colleague, Councillor Jackson.
Yes. Can you provide specific measurable indicators with baselines and annual targets for each of the 8 great priorities, and confirm whether those have been independently validated or risk assessed?
So the answer, there's two kind of things to kind of say about this. So one is around the big outcome measures, which I spoke about, and we do have those, and we track those over a long period of time. So that's things like life expectancy, that's things like employment rate, big things that don't change quickly, that we want to track and monitor over time. And as a partnership, we look at those as part of the annual report. Like the table I put up, we look what was the last 5 years, how do we compare to national, are we narrowing any gaps, are we moving in the right trajectory, and what's the story behind that trajectory. So we do that for our outcome measures, and that's a partnership response. I think the bit around the great priorities, I'm going to refer back to every quarter. This committee will have a finance and performance report, which has performance measures against those 8 priorities with targets, which you can see how we're doing. But I do want to make the distinction between big outcome measures that we're trying to go across the place, like employment rate, life expectancy, and the performance measures as the council, which might be, more specific to the council, might be something around, EHCP plans, or it might be something else which is specific for the council, which do have targets and do have baselines, and you do have opportunities to every quarter how they're doing, how they're progressing, are they on target, and the reasons if they're not, and what we're going to do about it. So that's the answer, but I just make sure that distinguish those two things, outcome measures and the performance you get as a committee for the council performance measures linked to our corporate plan.
Thank you, Alan. Just following on, how is progress tracked where responsibility is cross-organisational, e.g. between SINCA, NHS and CDC?
So I'd probably refer to some of the answers Lee said about as a partnership. We produce a annual report, Doncaster annual report, which kind of says how we're doing against all of those things, what are some of the things we're really good at, what's things that have gone really well, what are some of the things that maybe haven't gone as we expected. So we every year as an annual report, we put that together for the partnership. And as Lee described, we do have those kind of assurance statements and areas of focus as a partnership that we kind of focus on each year and make sure where things are maybe not going as we would expect or as well as we'd like, we've got an opportunity and a chance to kind of talk about how we do that as a partnership as well.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson, thank you. Of course you can.
Just to give a bit of an example, I think one of the things that's happening is the pathways to work. So the economic inactivity pilot that we've got across South Yorkshire, it's a great example of some of the things that we've been talking about. So that's Simca involved in that, it's the council involved in that, it's partners locally involved in that, and it's the NHS. So all of those different parts, if you like, have all got their own accountabilities. But what we've set up, or South Yorkshire has set up through this, is a kind of joint partnership arrangement where all the different partners come together and are making a contribution and showing the difference that they're making. So each place, Barnsley, Rotherham, Doncaster and Sheffield, are saying this is how it's going for us and these are the things that we're responsible for, and then the NHS will say these are the things that we're trying to do, for example about healthy workplaces and promoting how people can stay in work and improve their health in work. And then so there's things that Simca are doing around business engagement or doing some things at a regional level. So it's a really good example about people coming together, but there's a shared set of things that we're trying to do, but everyone's making a contribution, but we're all sort of sharing that contribution. And I think increasingly that's how things will develop.
Thank you. And just finally on that, how often are those cross-organisational meetings compared to our quarterly ones?
So the Economic and Activity Trailblazer governance meets, I think it's every 6 weeks. So each place that does an update and says how's it going, and each of the partners does an update as well. So that's a good example. There are other things that we do that may be less frequent than quarterly for different things. So for example, Get Doncaster Moving, which is about sport and physical activity. That board meets probably every quarter. So probably a bit of horses for courses. So I suppose it illustrates what we're saying is there's kind of different arrangements for different things that we're doing that make sense, if that makes sense.
It does, and the only reason I ask that is because obviously if we're going to be receiving updates every quarter, they're going to be quite up to date, aren't they? Because you might have only just had a meeting themselves about it. That's the main thing, is we're not getting out of date data or anything like that. Yeah, thank you.
Is out of date, not out of date, but we struggle with a lag is some of those outcome measures that Alan put up there. You'll notice on the slide it says last updated 2023 or 2024. Some of those, I suppose, big outcome measures, they're collected nationally and they're not updated as often as we might get a quarterly report. So some of those big things we're looking in the rear view mirror, if you like, rather than looking ahead, because it's looking backwards. But that's just the way that data is collected.
I appreciate that. Nothing more, Alan? No? Thank you. Thank you. We'll move on to question 5, which is one for myself. It's to do with financial integration. Given the scale of ongoing budget pressures, we all know about those, and the reliance on external funding, for example, gain share, capital receipts, DL, UHC grants, how confident is the Council that the long-term ambitions of the borough strategy are financially sustainable beyond 2028 when the statutory override on DSG deficit ends? I know that's a difficult question to answer.
So I think there's 2 parts to this. So the first bit, I'd kind of refer back to what Lee was saying earlier about we're adaptive, and who knows what 2028 will bring, but that's why we have an annual cycle of planning for our corporate plan and a budget. That's why we have a medium-term financial strategy that we update regularly, so that we can build that in as much as we can, and we're flex and we're adaptable as things arise. So that's something that's really important to us, and I think we've demonstrated that over the past few years, and we will need to keep doing that. And that's a very honest appraisal of things like that. But things like the investment plan, making sure we're bringing and knitting some of those resources together, is one of the key things that we need to do on an ongoing basis to ensure we can deliver against some of the priorities in the borough strategy. I think the second bit, which was around the DSG override, I think that is a national question that is a tricky one. There is a white paper coming out early in 2026 that has been delayed. There might be some mention of things in the budget next week. We'll have to wait and see. But we need to be able to respond to some of those national conversations that will come forward. But I agree that is a tricky one that we'll need to face. But it's one of many things that's tricky that we're facing at the moment. But that's probably the best answer for that at the moment.
Yeah, I know we've talked about the DSG override, deficit override in 2028 at previous meetings, and we've been kind of told, yeah, it's 2 years away, but I am kind of concerned that it's increasing, not decreasing, and that we'll suddenly hit a brick wall.
Yeah, I mean, and this is not a unique problem to Doncaster at all, and part of what the white paper will start to think about, as we understand it, is that not just around the override and the financial situation, but how services for SEND operate, both the mainstream schools and other. And like I say, there's lots to unpack as part of that, and that's probably why the white paper has been delayed, because it is a very difficult policy area. When it comes out early 2026, we will need to respond to that white paper and that consultation, and we'll need to do that collectively together with schools and others in the area to see what that looks like.
Just to continue that, then, will you look at that regionally as well? Because I think all the regional authorities are in much the same position. Well, I think Sheffield's worse, isn't it?
I imagine that will be a topic that policy officers like me and Lee will be talking with regional colleagues for quite a long time. But the white paper will be a really good opportunity to bring all of that thinking together that national government have done, and seeing what some of the proposals start to look like. And we'll then need to see how that stacks up locally and have those conversations.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-on. Have any of the strategic priorities been costed or risk rated against ongoing financial feasibility? And I've added ongoing there because obviously that changes as we move forward, doesn't it?
So maybe not priorities in the way that we've set them out, but all of our work that sits underneath them, so things like the projects, we've spoken about the investment plan, all of those that we talk around have strict financial controls, all the things that Lee spoke about in terms of knitting resources together from different places to ensure that we can deliver those. We do, and we continue to do. And, a year ago, we didn't have some of the things that we're talking about now. A year from now, we might have different things. Part of our job is to continue that conversation about how do we bring resources together to deliver what we want to, and making sure that those financial controls are in place, so we're clear about how we're using our money and making sure it's value for money as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose just to add to what Al said, the government and in the financial settlement that we'll get in 2 or 3 weeks, they're trying to, or the rhetoric is, we'll see how it lands, is to free up resources more. So rather than everything having its own accountability regime, they're trying to bring different grants together to give them to councils to use as they see fit. Now, it won't be quite as simple as that. There'll be blocks, I'm presuming, of things. So, that, for just use homelessness and housing, there's probably 5 or 6 different grants that we get around housing and homelessness. And what I think the government is saying they'll do is they'll bring those together and give us a single grant for housing and homelessness, so it's easier for us to manage. So you're not having to report on 5 or 6 different things. You've got more flexibility. And I think that's where the outcomes come in, because what the government have consulted on, and we'll see whether this comes out next week, is a set of outcome measures that they expect all local authorities to be working towards. So reducing homelessness and rough sleeping will be one, improving life expectancy, improving skills, which align to what we've been talking about. And then it's our job to say, well, how do we think at a local level it's best for us to use those resources to focus on those outcomes? And the government have said, and it's the same at a South Yorkshire level, move away from monitoring lots of individual things to say, you've got a set of things you're working on. How is that going? And we're more accountable for those outcomes. So, and that's not just us. Again, it's partners together working on those things. So we'll see how that develops over the next few weeks.
Thanks, Lee. Just from what you've said about it being on the South Yorkshire level, but if it is that all this funding is generally put into one pot, would that be then dished out, if you like, but through Simca, or would it be a direct thing to the authority?
So there's 2 separate things. I apologise, I probably conflated them. So the direction of travel for local government is those grants that were sort of 5 or 6 for one thing, so children or homelessness, they're being brought together and given to us as a single grant. And the government, I think just yesterday, have published some further information on that. So for us at Doncaster, our settlement will become simpler. And so that should make our budget setting process easier for us to understand rather than having all these different grants that, as I say, which we've had previously. The same process is happening at South Yorkshire level. So there's something called an integrated settlement that Simca will get. So again, they've had lots of different grants that have come to them. So on housing or energy or employment, and that will all go into an integrated settlement. And again, there'll be the things that outcomes that at South Yorkshire level they'll be held accountable for. We are part of it, but held accountable for. And what we're trying to do through this process is make sure that they're not all separate things in terms of what we're trying to achieve. Yes, there might be separate financial settlements that go to us, that go to Simca, but we try and align them as much as possible. So it's easier for Simca and us to say we're all working towards broadly the same things. And whether the money comes regionally or directly to us locally, it's going towards the same things. And we're all trying to pull in the same direction. So there'll be two, one for Simca and then one for us.
Sorry. It concerns me slightly that obviously if all the funding is brought together for an authority to go at whatever they need to go at, whatever they find their priority highest to address, is something else going to get left behind? It's just a concern, and it's not happened yet. But I think it's something that should be kept on radar.
Yeah, agreed. And I guess that's where our planning cycle comes in. So, as councillors and as OSMC, from a budget point of view, it'll be like, right, what are we focusing on as our priorities in the corporate plan? And then how is the budget lining up to deliver those things? And then obviously the quarterly performance report, and you'll see how we're performing as a council, which things we're doing particularly well, where there's issues. So that gives that sort of ongoing accountability mechanism. And there will, and whatever the rhetoric is about it being more flexible and you can do stuff you want, there'll always be some things that you have to achieve minimum sort of standards at or focus on. And I think certainly some of the rhetoric that from on the South Yorkshire level is that the government departments, and it was always been like this, they're not always as what's the right word, willing to let go of some of the strings that they might have had. We still want you to do this in this way, even though it's in the integrated settlement. So I think it's always going to be a bit of a journey, that devolution work. So over time, it might get more and more flexible, as we go forward.
Thank you. I think we had some recent input from Simca regarding the integrated settlement as part of Treasury Management input. And obviously they spoke about the 5 pillars of delivery. Is that what we've got to basically do, is realign to those same 5 pillars to be able to make it a smooth transition to then outsource funding? Because that's where they're saying that's going to be the basis of the integrated settlement, is those pillars which make it very easy to understand where funding's going to and from.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely it does. And I think that's where that alignment of overall outcomes comes in. Because and I'll mention the South Yorkshire strategy, there's going to be a set of outcomes that are aligned to that strategy, and then we're trying to make sure that alignment follows through to what we're saying at a local level is our outcomes, and then they're also aligned to national government's outcomes, what they expect of us. So rather than having 3 separate things that compete with each other, you can see that there's some consistency, and then it's easy then to say in those pillars, well, we're directing our funding to this outcome because we think that's more important than, say, this outcome, or we're going to fund this, but it contributes to multiple outcomes. I think public transport's a really good example because that helps on a number of fronts, doesn't it, around getting people to work, connecting with other people, getting to leisure and other things. So that outcomes is very welcome. And I think, I don't know if we've mentioned it yet, I think Al mentioned it, the certainty of a 3-year budget settlement is also something that everyone in local government has been calling for a lot of years, and we've not had it. It's always been you get 1 year and then you get another year. So to be able to say however much it is, because I think we also need to acknowledge it probably won't be enough, whatever we get, even though there's been a fair funding review, it won't be enough to meet all the demands, but at least we'll have certainty and we'll be able to plan for a 3-year period, which is welcome, because some of the things we need to do, you can't just do them year to year. You have to think a bit longer term.
Thank you. Nothing to add on? No. We'll move on to question 6, which is to do with risk and adaptability, and I'll ask Councillor Jackson to.
The strategy describes a living plan, responsive to change. What formal process exists for updating it in response to emerging risks such as inflationary pressures, DSA project uncertainties and climate-related investment gaps.
Okay, so today's session is part of that. We're kind of halfway through the borough strategy, so this is our point to think about. Is it still relevant? Is it still right? The things that we need to change, and making sure we engage in the process of doing that. Our residents, our businesses, what's really important now, what has changed, and you've listed some things there. There are other things as well that we want to check in with. Is the strategy still relevant? And this is our opportunity to get that right. So we usually have a midterm review as part of our borough strategy. 10 years is a long time, and we're going through that now and involving people as we do that. The other thing to say is actually on a corporate plan. So corporately, we look at it every year as part of our annual cycle along with the budget. So again, that means that every year we can check in and say, is the council's contribution right? Has anything changed? Has anything come across a new risk, a new opportunity, and build that in as part of our corporate plan and our budget cycle? So I think there's an opportunity there to ensure that our strategic work, our borough strategy and our corporate plan is fit and relevant for whatever is needed across the borough, mainly via those two things that I've just mentioned.
Thank you, Alan. Just a follow-up. Has a mid-term review been commissioned? And if not, when will one be scheduled for OSMC for consideration?
So we're thinking this process that we're going through now is the mid-term review of the borough strategy. At the moment, we're not planning to do another review between now and 2030, but that doesn't mean we won't be looking at things and not producing the annual reports about how we're doing. And we'll also have those opportunities, as I say, around the corporate plan every year to ensure that strategically we're thinking about some of the things that really matter to the Doncaster and the place. So we're not planning to do another review of the borough strategy between now and 2030, but hopefully the way I've described the corporate plan and your opportunities to look at the quarterly performance and finance report and to look at the partnership annual reports are all opportunities and markers to show how we're doing. And if there's anything that's come up that we've not thought of, a new risk, a new opportunity, as I say, they'll be part of those processes. So hopefully we can take account of it in those ways.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, me again. Just looking at risks and things, and this obviously being mid-term review, we knew that there were the will to get to the 2030 net zero target that were pushed through pensions, through lots of different things. How are we with that then? Because there's not a lot of mention of net zero targets in some of this. So where are we with that? Is it an achievable target, or is it gone filed under B for bin?
So there's kind of two things. One of the priorities was around tackling climate change. That was our frame. And so there will be things in there which we think are really important. Things like housing retrofit, actually creating warmer homes, reducing bills. That's healthier for people, better for the economy, and helps with emissions. But primarily it helps people. They're things that we really want to make a difference on. It has things in there around creating better environments, around planting more trees. That was one of the top things that people said as part of the big neighbourhood conversation about what do they like about where they live, is those green environments, that I can access some of those spaces and they're good quality spaces. So within the borough strategy, there are things in there which help with that. The net zero target, which you talk around, which is obviously a national thing as well as local and as well as regional, you're right. That's one of our strategic risks that we monitor as part of our kind of quarterly cycle. So again, as part of your committee, you will have the strategic risks, an audit committee will have the strategic risks, and that's part of that as well. But it is part of our borough strategy, some of the things that I've mentioned, because those things really make a difference to people. If we can retrofit homes and make them warmer for people, reduce people's bills, and reduce emissions at the same time, that wins for everybody, and that's something we really want to push.
Thank you. Final little bit is, when we close this meeting today, does that bring an end to the midterm review, or is it ongoing for any longer?
So the midterm review is going to be, agreed at council in January. So I would see that as the end point for the midterm review.
Thank you. So it's only because obviously now we're aware that we're actually in the process. I will encourage the committee to get involved with making sure we get everything we need answered before the review end, the midterm review ends. That's all it was. Thank you. We'll move on to question 7, and this is from Councillor Kidd. Thank you.
Thank you. How will the borough strategy actually integrate with or work with or influence the ongoing work across the region to franchise public transport? Thank you.
Thank you. So the strategy will sort of set out what our priorities are locally. So we'll talk, for example, about investment sites where we see growth happening, where we see employment happening, as well as our approach to where we're going to see housing growth. So obviously we've got particular sites and particular areas across the city where we'll see sort of housing growth over the next few years. So our strategy is almost like our sort of asks into the South Yorkshire franchising conversations. So if we know where future employment's going to be, or where people are going to be living, or where we've got poor routes, we will feed that in and influence the South Yorkshire discussions on franchising. That's not to say that everything that we might want we would be able to get, because I think, as everyone knows, and I think members have had some presentations from Simca about franchising, or certainly our officers locally, there's limited resources that we've got, so we're going to have to prioritise which routes we go for. But we will, and I guess that's the advantage of franchising. It gives us as a local partnership and as local representatives, you as local representatives, us as local authorities, chance to influence what we couldn't influence before. So our strategy is really important to be able to do that and make that case, if you like, within Simca. I suppose the other thing to say that this is not an immediate sort of fix either, because we're going through a process that leads to franchising, and then there'll be choices made about routes. But that's the journey that we're on.
I suppose a bit of a follow-up is like what people have asked before about the accountability and where those decisions are actually made about what routes. Like you say, we're not going to get everything we request, but there's got to be some accountability as to how those decisions are made.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, that'll be a Simca decision. Obviously, we're part of Simca. We're a member of Simca. And I think part of the challenge with franchising is making sure that public engagement happens, the feedback comes in about what people think, and then there's a connection between the feedback and the decisions that are made, and that's then communicated back out. As we say, it's going to be about prioritising, because there's not enough money in the system to do that. But I would contrast that to maybe what we've had up to now, where there's no accountability at all. There is no public sort of face, if you like, of those decisions. It's purely been done by private, and I'm exaggerating slightly, but just purely by private operators based on what's profitable. I know there's been subsidy and various other things over the last few years, but at least this is a step into that greater accountability and transparency that I think everyone would want to see, and the public said they wanted to see in the consultation.
With regards to the bus franchising, I believe Doncaster is probably one of the first on the list to be part of that. Do you think there's any chance we could become a guinea pig or a testing ground, as opposed to receiving what would be a good service from the start? You know what I mean? Being the first ones. Is there any risk in that?
Yeah, I think it's probably how we look at it and how we position it, because being the first, you can learn and see how it goes and iron out some of those challenges. And I think one of the first depots is going to be the Doncaster depot that comes in, so that should bring other benefits as well in terms of capital investment or bringing it up to speed. So again, I think it's how we influence, how we make sure that we keep pressing the Doncaster position into that, but understanding we're part of a South Yorkshire system. And I guess the role of OSMC and other local accountabilities will be, how is that going? What's we taking from it? What do we need to adjust? And what are we learning? So I always think it's better to be in these things first, and because then you get an opportunity to sort of shape it and learn as you go.
Oh yeah, totally agree. Because obviously, often when something's a first or something, it gets everything thrown at it to try and get it right. And I'm hoping that's the case. I'm sure you are as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Moving on, we're going to talk about borough strategy achievements so far, and that's Antoinette.
So it's a bit of an overarching one, really. I think we've kind of recognised there have been some notable achievements so far in the review, but obviously there'll be areas that have struggled. Have we taken account of that? What are these areas, and how are we going to move forward with those in the new second half?
Yep, thank you. So, yeah, I think we've got quite a lot of good achievements, of things that have happened over the last few years. And I think one of the slides that I'll put up just put a bit of a summary of those, you know, things like bringing investment into the city, working, tackling things like improving educational attainment. I think the latest figures that I think will come to a scrutiny soon show that we've sort of achieved or exceeded national average in all key stages, which is the first time I can ever remember that in sort of 20 years. But that's a great example of, it's not just the council, it's how do we work together as partners, and your point about orchestrating, how do colleagues in education, working with communities, schools, etc., how do we work together? So I think we've got some really good foundations to build on, but also on that slide you've seen some things where we've got some kind of quite entrenched and quite complex challenges. So child poverty is a really good example, where rates are increasing across the whole country, and there's a new child poverty strategy that's due to come out, I think in the next, well, any time, it said autumn, so that'll be interesting to see what that looks like. So some of those things, the forever challenges, and I guess the strategies about, I know this probably sounds a bit boring, but using the tools that we've got and the resources that we've got and the partnerships that we've got to make the biggest difference that we can, sort of year to year, month to month, you know, corporate plan to corporate plan, because some of these things we need to just keep chipping away at them. We're never going to say we've tackled, I don't think anywhere in the country we'll be able to say we've tackled child poverty or we've cracked healthy life expectancy. And I guess that's what the borough strategy allows us to do, is say these are the things that we think is really important. This is what we're going to do to help us to move forward in that area. And then we're going to use that to kind of galvanise everybody behind those, and then we'll check in and see how we're doing, and we'll always hopefully be moving forward. But I don't think we'll ever be able to say something's done or we've fully achieved it.
So if you were to say one thing locally, because obviously you've talked about huge things there, child poverty, and there will always, sadly, I'm sure there will always be some form of child poverty that we're trying to tackle. Locally, though, is the one thing that you've really thought, well, actually, that just didn't work, or we need to do more on that, or if we did have done this differently, so you're putting that into the next half?
Yeah, there's probably lots, actually. One thing I would say that we've learned a lot from is how do we work in neighbourhoods and communities, because it's something we've been doing for 20 odd years in Doncaster, but I think over the last 2 to 3 years we've tried to sort of re-energise that and revamp it, if that makes sense. And what we've learned through that is that, and mentioned it a few times, and it sounds a little bit of a kind of a sort of soft thing to say, but relationships, investing time with partners in the NHS, across the council, with the voluntary and community sector, people in the education sector, spending time understanding each other, understanding each other's worlds, and understanding how we can work better together, because you can't force that you can't say you lot all just work better together, because you've got to create the conditions for it. And I think that's something that, again, it's a forever job, but it's something that I think we've learned quite a lot on that over the last few years, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why the neighbourhood renewal thing is so important in this borough strategy, because that's what the residents say. We want you to work together in your communities for our benefit. And I've heard lots of members on this committee and in other places talk about how can we get better joined up, and because it don't feel like we are. So that's something we've learned, and it's been putting more time and effort and energy into that. And I think having that as one of our big 4 things that we're suggesting that we're going to do in this next 4 years shows that we're building on that learning, and we're taking that forward.
Thank you. Moving on to public engagement and legitimacy. I'm glad I said that right. I was worried about it. And it's Rebecca. Councillor Boo.
Thank you, Chair. How representative was the Big Doncaster conversation and other consultation exercises used to shape the borough strategy, particularly engaging communities outside the main urban centre?
So, really good question. I think it's to what extent it was. So I mentioned the Big Neighbourhood conversation had 5,150 responses. We did get a good distribution across wards, across the borough. So again, it wasn't just urban centre wards. We did get a good, In fact, I think one of the most responses was from the Finningley ward in terms of absolute numbers. So we did get distribution across the borough. But I think the bit that's really important is that it's the big neighbourhood conversation along with the other engagements that we've tried to pull together. So I put some of those up on the screen, like the community safety strategy consultation had about 3,000 respondents. The big city centre conversation had about 8,000 respondents. The culture strategy work had about 900 conversations with people that we're bringing together. And it's how we bring all of those engagements together to ensure we get, I suppose, the most reach that we can. Also, as part of each one of those engagements, we monitor about, actually, did we reach enough young people or older people? Did we reach people from minority ethnic groups? And it is difficult to get a really even distribution across all of those things. But for each one of those engagements, there's a story. So the big neighbourhood conversation, you know, some of my team went down and spent 2 days at the college because we knew we wanted to get to young people. And we spent all day there speaking to staff, speaking to young people about what's your ideas about your neighbourhood and where you live in order to try and get that representation. We had adverts on radios and in the Free Press and in the French Gate in order to try and reach people who maybe don't always want to respond. But I will always acknowledge there is always more you can do, and there is always more people that you can reach. And I would say I would personally say the Big Neighbourhood Conversation did a lot of things to try and reach people, and I could list and I could carry on that story about how we did that, including 1,400 conversations of, you know, summer events where our Doncaster team spoke to people at the event. So we didn't just wait for people to come to us, we went to them as much as we possibly could. But it's always a challenge to try and penetrate parts of the population that maybe don't always want to respond. And that's something that's a forever problem for us about how we get that representation. But I think the answer is if we can try and use as much of those different exercises as possible, that's our best chance of trying to reach as many people as possible and make sure that the things that we're saying that we're engaging with and the priorities that then make it into our strategies are reflective of what people are telling us. But the question is a great question, and it's a challenge that we wrestle with a lot.
So just following up from there then, what mechanisms are in place to refresh that engagement now the demographic and economic conditions have shifted post-2021?
So almost all of the things that were on that slide and things that I've just mentioned have happened in the past 6 to 9 months. So they are recent engagements that we would have. So we are trying to build on what's recent to feed into our borough strategy. So I'm hopeful that that is a good way to do that, so it feels reflective of what people are telling us now. The other part of your question, I think, is about, well, actually, after January, you know, other things happen and other engagements happen. There are engagements happening all the time, right across our partnership. And again, part of our job is to make sure we bring some of that together on a regular basis to make sure that that engagement activity is right and is still in that kind of line of travel in terms of what we're trying to achieve. But again, I will say that is a challenge. It is a challenge that we think about a lot.
Councillor Jackson, did you want to ask anything?
Actually, I think Alan's already answered that. No, thank you, Alan.
Thank you. My question would be, and it's something that's bugged me since we got the figures back. We're claiming that they're pretty good returns, and I don't disagree with that. But what can we take from the 98% of people who are silent? What do we take from that? Or do we take it that those people are happy with their lot, or do we take it that there's apathy? Because I don't know which way we view it as a council. For me, I think it's a mixture of both, really. There are going to be a large percentage of the population out there who are happy with how this borough's being run. I've no doubt about that. But what do you take from the silence of the 98%?
The simple answer is we don't know. We don't know the proportions in terms of what people are thinking. But I come back to, this is why it's important to triangulate and say that one engagement is one engagement. and 5,000 responses are 5,000 responses. But if you combine that with all those other things that we have, and we work with teams that are out in the communities, our Well Doncaster teams, our community teams, and make sure as best we possibly can, the things that we're hearing, the things that we summarise on the screen there, are the things that people are hearing, that's our best shot at getting this as reflective as we possibly can. And on top of that, continue as best we possibly can to engage in different channels and different routes to try and reach people. The 98% that you say, how do we reach those? We continue to try our best to different ways to reach them as best we can.
Thank you. And just to add to what Al said, I guess as we implement different aspects of the strategy, there'll be different levels of engagement and consultation that would happen on an ongoing basis. So just again, as an example, the Pride in Place resources that we talked about, as that gets deployed over the next 18 months or so, there'll be a whole heap of targeted, very local engagement about how the things we already know that residents have told us, how do we build on that and focus what that money should be spent on. I know, again, example in Bentley and in Asken, the work that's happening around that local resource that was put in the budget last year around neighbourhood renewal, for example, there's engagement taking place there. So there's different kinds of ongoing engagement that we keep doing, because you're absolutely right, we need to keep sense checking, don't we? We need to keep checking in with people and finding out what they're thinking. And some people engage in something because it really fires them up, or they're really interested. Other people might not, and then there'll be something that comes along later that they think, oh yeah, I'm really interested in that. It might be about a local park or something very, very local, or whether a pedestrian crossing is going to get implemented, or something like that. So I think it's good to keep an overview of all of the engagement that we've got, because the other thing that residents tell us is sometimes they're a bit sick of it. they think we do too much. So sometimes it's trying to find that right balance, and I guess there's no perfect answer to that.
I think all I'm trying to say is, how much assurance can you give us that the borough strategy is not wholly based against a very, very small percentage of people? When we've got 21 wards, you've got 55 councillors who are embedded in those wards, who speak to people every day, and for me, that's where you're going to get the true measure of what we should. That's where your true feedback's coming from. How much are you plugged into that, and how easy is it for us? I don't really understand how easy it is for me as a ward councillor to feed it back to you, because obviously we've got more access to the residents you're talking about, that 98%, than many other people have access to. How can we make that better for you? And is there a system in place for us to feed that back into you as an ongoing system of feedback?
Thanks, Carl. A really great question. And I think what we can say is we've done the best we can at this now, in terms of things like the big neighbourhood conversation, the things that I'll mention around targeting particular sort of groups like young people who we were underrepresented. And then we've tried to make the most of all of the different information that we've had. On an ongoing basis, I think you're absolutely right, because you guys are out there in the community, you getting your ears bent in the nicest possible way, I guess, about things that people are feeling. So I think the very local level mechanisms we have, like our ward member meetings, the relationships you'll have with your community team colleagues about things that are coming up, the problem solving that's done at that very local level. We've almost got like a kind of rapid feedback loop about those kind of things, and then what we do is we'll gather that from our communities colleagues and make sure that that's triangulated with what we've got already. So, and I think that's just an ongoing sort of iterative process that we have. And we've also introduced, I think relatively recently, the ward member networks, where in each of the localities all the members come together on a quarterly basis to sort of share. And I know there's thematic sort of focus for that. We had a good discussion around planning enforcement in the north locality, and we've got one coming up around crime and community safety. So we've got those kind of ways to do that. And there's ongoing community engagement meetings that are in place as well across the police. So it's trying to use all that information as best we can.
Yeah, I think we can strengthen that two-way between us, 55 of us. That's a really good system to get. I think I'm not truly aware of a two-way system. I know we feed things into our neighbourhood teams and things like that. We don't often get sort of any feedback from that at a later date. Might be something we can bring up with our neighbourhood leads to just say, has this had any impact on anything? But thank you very much for that. Yeah. Question now for Councillor Kidd.
Do excuse me if I'm gathering things together as I ask this question, because I am actually going for a train, and you may be answering through an empty chair. Just that, how is the Equality Act taken into consideration when assessing outcomes? And actually, it could sort of give that question as well to how you access people to consult with. Because I do know that you probably have done a lot of consultations for voluntary groups who probably do have access to people who are don't necessarily have the voices heard. So it's a bit of both, really. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mentioned some of those engagement routes at the start of the previous question, I think, but just to kind of build on that, when we had our kind of community conversations that I mentioned where we were out there over the summer period, that did involve things like focus groups with black and minority ethnic communities, with asylum seekers, people with learning disabilities, with a focus group on the deaf and hard of hearing community, young people, and I think what we tried to do is try to kind of find a way and work with community groups, people in certain cohorts to try and reach them as part of that, as part of the kind of consultation engagement exercise. Like I said, that is a challenge, and there's a question there about representation. If I do a focus group with 10 people from a cohort, that isn't always representative of the whole group. So I know that that's a challenge, but we have tried to get that kind of spectrum of channels and engagement as best we possibly can. And some of those examples that I've given. I suppose the other thing when thinking about the Equality Act, we will have to have a equality impact assessment as part of the borough strategy that will go alongside the approval process. So that will be set out. And I think importantly, anything that the borough strategy has within it in terms of suggestions, so if projects or things that sit within that, will have their own equality impact assessment to assess the specific implications of doing that on different protected characteristics and groups. But it's important that we do that, and it's important that those impact assessments sit alongside those decisions, so it's really clear and transparent about how we've gone about stuff and the impacts on certain populations as we do those approval processes.
Thank you. Councillor Corbett, did you want to ask us supplementary?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm quite interested about if you've gathered information from care leavers, because I know a couple of years ago we incorporated care leavers into like a little bit of bylaw and adding them as a characteristic for Doncaster. Obviously not got much information. Obviously sometimes they can be hard to reach groups as well. So just want to know if you incorporated groups such as care leavers.
We've not specifically, we have done quite a bit of work with young people in different ways. So we did a focus group, I mentioned we were at the college as well, but it is something we perhaps could consider as in to help us between now and January or some point in between to kind of maybe get some children in care or some sort of focus group arranged. So that's something we can consider to support the rest of the development.
Absolutely, because their lived experiences will be different to other people's in the borough. So I would appreciate if you can get something to be formed part of the borough strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Safe journey. Moving on to the next question, which is DDT engagement. Antoinette.
You've mentioned you've done some work with consultation in terms of the colleges, but I'm thinking schools, primary and secondary, because you'll get a good response from primary schools. I also think it's a bit of a captive audience. And these are the people who, these are the young people who will then become the adults. And you also have a bit of a captive audience in terms of your numbers for parents.
Yeah, absolutely. So we made sure that we got all of this around to schools. We really encouraged them to use it as part of their newsletters. We know some primary schools and secondary schools did. We encouraged as best we possibly can. We know some schools didn't, but we do know a good number did, and that's really encouraging because, as you say, that is the young people, but it's also the parents, it's also the staff that work there, and as you say, they are communities themselves, aren't they? So we did do that. We did approach. We did spend some time at the Doncaster College, 2 days as part of their induction process. We know that we worked with New College to encourage students as well in terms of that kind of post-16 provision. And we also know as part of our Doncaster conversations, those conversations when we were out over the summer, there was nearly 300 under 18 conversations that we had as part of that as well. So we did our best, I suppose, but and we know that we did get some responses from schools, which was great, but it wasn't a universal response.
Just a quick one, really. School councils are often can be approached via the schools, and the children themselves and the young people will take it on. I think maybe, is that a way to approach it in the future, perhaps?
Really good idea. You're right. They have school councils. They have all sorts now. I think the one I know, there's a safety squad and various other things that they have, and it's great, isn't it? Because actually, it's a way that you can engage with young people. And I think you're right. That might be engaging with the school councils or their equivalents or whatever they've got in place is a nice way to do things. And certainly, perhaps if we're thinking about specific, educational skills things in the future, that might be a really good way to kind of engage differently.
Thank you very much. I'll ask the next question on behalf of Councillor Hollingworth. And I have got something to add to it as well, so that works out really well. The insights obtained from the engagement of providers with the themes that are most important to our residents. Residents have told us that safety, cleanliness and infrastructure are key priorities, alongside crime prevention and effective policing. Road conditions and traffic management remain important, as do the appearance and upkeep of public spaces. I know it's quite a generalised question, but what is happening regarding infrastructure? Is that a priority for residents, as far as you're concerned?
It's really important, and you're right, infrastructure is quite a big word in terms of what does that mean, but we know that we're using sustainable transport funds to kind of improve roads and pathways, cycle routes, so in terms of the infrastructure for people and pavements, so we know that those are happening. We know that we've got future parks investing in our parks, so again, that's both in terms of safety and lighting, but also in terms of quality and nature of parks. We know that we've got a range of road improvements that are taking place, that are happening across the borough, and there's some examples of some of those as well. But equally, you could kind of argue that some of that's around the social infrastructure. So how do we build kind of relationships? How do we build up community groups to support people within their communities? So it's quite a big question, but I would say that the borough strategy tries to address some of those infrastructure things with, if you think about economic growth as one of those big collaborations, some of the infrastructure things are key to unlocking some of that, also with housing growth and that neighbourhood renewal aspect that we've spoken about, that the social fabric within neighbourhoods, how important that is. And again, we've got something in the borough strategy that responds to that as well. So it's a big question, and you could probably do a big answer to it, but I'd hope that those 4 things that I've spoken about as part of the borough strategy go some way to answering the question about infrastructure in its broadest sense and what we're trying to address as part of that.
Thanks. And just building on, again, what Al said, I think there's probably 2 specifics we can look to. So in terms of the Great 8, we've got that element of the borough strategy, and there'll be some very specific things that will happen between now and 2030 in the borough strategy. And then what we'll see through the corporate plan is then, well, what does that look like each year? What progress will we expect to see? So things like, you see through things like the capital programme that would come to OSMC, some of those big things that we said we were going to do. Likewise, the updates around each of the Great 8, quarter by quarter, will cover where those improvements, whether it's social infrastructure and investment in community groups, or whether it's sort of the harder infrastructure like road improvements and other things, the progress that we're making on those things. And you have measures like the condition of principal roads and things like that show, yes, we've done a project, but what's the overall indicator or service standard that we're monitoring that against?
Thank you. If I can just bring in like a personal example of where aspirations are quite high, but the reality of life then kicks in. Yeah. I brought a petition to full council about from over 130 residents of Barnby about Pine Hall Road and Meadowfield Road, the speeding issues there. That's a great example of pulling people together there. And when the elderly lady who traipsed around that village getting people to sign it, she needs a medal. But instead of getting a medal and instead of getting what we want, the aspirations have all been dashed by budgetary restrictions. Do you know what I mean? And that is the fact of life, isn't it? What that petition did, it ignited meetings between myself and the highest people in highways. And I expected that to happen, because that should happen. But the be-all and end-all of all those meetings is, sorry, Councillor Hughes, there is no money for it. Yeah? And that is the reality of it. And it's all right us talking a good game. And all I believe now, the end of everything is now probably we're on a waiting list for that. There's always something positive to take out of it, because out of that, we're going to create a local community speed awareness group. We're going to police that road themselves until it gets sorted. But that's reality over what we're trying to achieve. Do you know what I mean? That's when reality kicks in. And people out there see the reality, they see the aspirations, and the aspirations of those documents you've shown us are quite high. But when reality kicks in, we have to be totally open and honest with the residents as to why this happens. And I've had to do the explaining for that. Do you acknowledge what I'm saying?
Absolutely, Carl. Absolutely. That's the constant challenge we've got, isn't it? We've got to set a positive and a hopeful sort of ambition in terms of where we want to get to. That's what I think people would expect of us, not to just sort of accept, mediocrity is maybe not the right word, but just accept that. But then the ability to achieve it is dependent on lots of things, like how much money we get. But some of that is then about how do we as a place and as a partnership make sure that we maximise the amount of resources or capacity or support we get. And that comes back to that whole point about the ethos, the Team Doncaster ethos. And we've got some good examples of where when we work together, we can bring things in and make things happen. But there's always a choice, and there's always limits to that, which is that's a real challenge. It's a real challenge. But I'm really pleased what you said there about the positives that came out of it, around a community group, people coming together around speed awareness, which that in itself will have an impact, won't it, in terms of improved connections and relationships in the community.
I think in conclusion, it's just recognising that I think we're going to have to ask from the residents assistance as well, being part and parcel of the problems you're bringing out in a survey. You can actually make a difference yourself about that. I think that's really important. And I think as long as we engage with all our residents in the 21 wards, we've got to accept nowadays, in this day and age of financial restrictions, that we have to do some of the legwork ourselves. And I think that's all I'm trying to get acknowledged, that the council recognises that. That's what we're trying to do, as opposed to, what might be an overarching strategy. The reality is we're going to have to engage with people a lot more and say, come on, you've got to help yourselves, actually. Yeah. That's all it was. Taking us into the finishing line for the OSMC part of it, down the finishing straight, is Antoinette.
Just two questions, really. One was around, I suppose, being ready to ensure that the borough benefits from all the things, the national strategies and the funds that are available. And I would particularly highlight AI, and I wouldn't say I know an awful lot about it, but the bits I do use make a huge difference. And I think as a borough, we need to be absolutely ready to use that to our advantage.
No, absolutely. I suppose the two parts to your question, I think one of the things about being ready is having a plan. Because everything things that come our way, opportunities, people will say, well, what are you trying to achieve? How does it align with what we're trying to achieve, whether that's a central government department or whoever? So us having clarity about what we're trying to achieve and where we've got opportunities, whether that's spatially, so things like investment zone status or sites, or whether that's in communities where we've got really good community organisations kind of working together. So part of being ready is having a plan. And I think we've had some really good examples. We've talked about a few things today where Doncaster's benefited. So the Pride in Place, like those 4 that we've got, no other place outside of a big city has got 4. We're the only sort of smallish city or large town that's got that. So that's a really good example. So things like Get Doncaster Moving, that we've been really positive and benefiting from that. So Sport England have invested in Doncaster over 10 years, but part of that's because we had a plan and we had a direction that we wanted to go in. So that's definitely being ready. And if it's not just us, but as a partnership, if we're working alongside health partners or we're working alongside private sector partners, it makes it easier for us to bring those resources and opportunities in. And on AI, I think you're absolutely right. You know, if you went back to the original version of Doncaster Delivering Together, we didn't mention AI in that because it wasn't really as big a thing. I think what we've done, and this is a good example of how we've changed and emerged an approach over the last few years, AI is now a central part of what we talk about every day. So the Gateway 1 building that Al mentioned, that's going to be a focus and centre of excellence for AI and digital businesses, and we've already got a number of them who want to move into that building. So it's becoming part of what we talk about. Another good example of AI is not just about what it can do from a business point of view, but how do we educate people and maybe remove the fear. And there's always going to be some element of caution with AI. So the Right Up Our Street Festival of Light in the Minster, which is running until the end of this week, is brilliant because it's a 40-foot piece of AI art, which is amazing. When you go in there and you look at it, it's just absolutely mesmerising. So, and that's part of that has been the local business Automated Analytics have sponsored that. So that young people can get involved and start to understand AI. So I think that point about how does culture and the economy and the business side of things, how do we bring those together? So it's not just something, AI is not just something happening over there, it's something that's affecting everyone's lives. And we're experimenting as a council with AI in terms of how it can improve the efficiency of some of the things that we do. So our, for example, in customer services, we're using AI now. And relatively soon, in the next few weeks, there'll be something called a golden number that we introduce. So rather than someone phoning up and saying, "Can you put me through to waste?" or listening to 5 options and pressing a button, they'll be able to say, "Put me through to waste," and AI will, or it might even be waste. It's like, "I've got a problem with my bins." So that golden number, AI will help to get that person to the right place. They don't have to faff around with numbers and options and other things. So I think we're using it in all sorts of different ways, and it'll just get. It'll accelerate probably over the next few years. And I think Al's point about it's one of the things that we specifically say in the borough strategy that we want to embrace is not the right word, but we want to make sure it works for us as far as we can. And we're all learning about AI, aren't we? Because we're experiment with it. Every time you pick up your phone, do a search on Google, you've got AI on your phone, so it's there in everything we do.
Thank you. Just before your final question, Andrew, finger on buzzer. We'll just get my colleague to he just wants to ask a question.
Just regarding the lumps of steel that we see sticking up, did the funding come from were it levelling up or Town's fund? I can't remember. Town deal.
Town deal. That was Town deal.
And was it not supposed to increase footfall?
Part of the objective is that, yes. So I think the thinking is if you've got businesses right in the centre of the city, it's going to bring more people and more businesses and more footfall in. Yes, so yes, absolutely. That's one of the objectives.
Just finally, so why outside railway station? Because if you're going to bring people in, they're going to get off the train, they're going to go there. There's car parks over there and over there. So if they come in a car, they're not going very far. Why were it not thought that maybe other side of town or on Bennetthorpe somewhere it might have been a good idea, and then tick some heritage boxes on way and increase footfall that had come straight through middle of town. It lost me in the application when it was supposed to be a building with no anchor tenant. It was a building that was put there to expand business and try to regenerate that part of Doncaster. And then all of a sudden it became this AI hub. And I lost complete track there because it didn't seem to fit what the funding was about.
So I think we're trying to hit multiple outcomes there because in terms of an anchor tenant, we've got one. So Automated Analytics I think they've been quite open. They're going to take the top floor of the building. There's a number of other businesses and organisations who want to take space on that. So in terms of education, institutions, small businesses, even schools want to take some space in there. So in terms of the overall objective, it's the same thing to bring businesses and activity into the city centre. We don't have, and historically we haven't had good quality office accommodation in the city centre. Now, when we first started it, you're right, the focus wasn't going to be on AI. We were talking about it being potentially around relocation of civil servants and things like that. But actually that's speculative because it didn't have a function and a purpose. So by saying, and obviously we know that the economy is growing, we've got lots of digital businesses and tech businesses in Doncaster, but they didn't have a focal point. And other places like Barnsley, for example, they've got Digital Media Centre 1, and they're building Digital Media Centre 2. So because the businesses themselves are saying, actually, we don't have anywhere to sort of come together, we're very sort of disparate, you've got businesses who are wanting to do that, we're wanting to regenerate the area. It seems like it was the right time and the right thing to do. And actually, by having a purpose and a focus, it's brought people to say, yeah, we're interested in that. We want to have a part of that. And so that, I think the benefit of that will be that it'll be easier for us to fill it and easier for us to get a really good, vibrant business community in there. The point about it being right next to the station is that because it is right next to the station. So the idea is, again, it's connectivity is great. People can come in from all parts of the country. We're 30 minutes away from Leeds, 20 minutes from York, an hour and a half from London. So people can locate there, businesses can locate there as well. But it's not just it's the start, not the end. So the city centre strategy that Al mentioned and the work that's been done around that is to see that area grow and develop further. And we've talked about the path from the city gateway all the way to waterfront, and there's different assets that we've got along there. We've got the Church View, we've got the B&M site, which potentially is ripe for further regeneration. So seeing that as a bit of a corridor up to the college at the waterfront site feels like it could be a really positive thing to do. So it's not the end; it's the start, I think, of a broader plan.
Thank you. Antoinette, back to you.
Just add one thing to that. I was just going to say, you're right, because I think, like water, money flows through the easiest channel, and I think Doncaster is a good place in terms of its transport links. So if you put media centres and you think about those things and put them in a place where people can easily get to from local and further away cities, then actually you will naturally attract more investment, won't you?
Absolutely, and the thing I mentioned about funding streams, like it's just there's just so many different opportunities. So obviously the things we've talked about, Gateway 1, that was one funding stream, and the town fund that's been mentioned. We hope that there will be an announcement in the budget about the Community Regeneration Partnership, which we've been working with the civil servants, and that will give us hopefully some extra capital investment to focus on other things. One of the things that's, if I get my time this right, one of those things that hopefully focus on, speaking to your point, Steve, is heritage, and how might we use some of that capital investment to do other things across the city. So it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, isn't it? We know broadly what the picture looks like, and then we can fill this piece in because we've got this bit of money, and we can fill this piece in when we get this other set of money. Obviously the money's never enough because you can never fill the whole picture all at once, but you just add to the jigsaw piece, piece by piece. So that takes time, doesn't it? And it's never done either, because by the time you've done it, you have to start again a little bit too.
Yes.
Last one. It was about the 10-year plan. Obviously, the Fit for the Future is commendable, but we all know the health service is absolutely creaking. So is there anything that the borough can do to support locally the NHS to ensure that it fulfils as much of the targets that it has as it can?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a number of things in the borough strategy which will help. The first thing I guess to say is the NHS are key partners to the borough strategy, and they are signed up to and contributing to and fully aware of the process that we're going through and part of that process that we're going through in terms of the borough strategy. In terms of some of the specifics, we've talked about the neighbourhood renewal priority as an example, and the city centre I'll just use those as good examples. So we as Doncaster were one of 43 places that are neighbourhood health pilots, which was an NHS process to support the ambitions of the NHS plan. And through our neighbourhood renewal priority in the borough strategy, that's the way that we'll support the achievement of that neighbourhood health. What does that mean in practice? It means partners working together in the community to make sure some of the preventative services are there, that partners are working together to create the conditions for people to be healthy. I give an example about that. In the North locality, we did something a few weeks ago about women's health. Women's life expectancy in the North locality is significantly lower than the average. So we had a very specific event in the Bullcraft Memorial Hall. We had over 200 women attend that. wanting to talk about their health. They got access to lots of different services. And out of that, a bit like your example, Carl, there was a group of women who wanted to develop a health hub for women and from the community to help to drive that forward. So that's a great example of partners working together, bringing services together, working with the community to put something in place that works for them. And there's different examples of that across the city. So the neighbourhood health work that's directly there to support the NHS plan, we're translating that and delivering that in a way that works for us locally through our local relationships, local partnerships, and examples like that women's health one.
So I'm thinking like Barnsley has the health in the shopping centres.
Yep.
So you got the new hub in the Alhambra, and we had the other hub that was in the glassworks and so on. Those are things that really do make a huge difference to people locally, because it's sometimes easier to travel into the centre than it is, and it would regenerate the centre as well. Are things like that in plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the example of the city centre strategy, that is one of the things that we are working to. I think there's a decision coming to Cabinet in the next 3 weeks, I think it is, 4 weeks in December, that's taking the next step to do that. So there's been lots of conversations with RDASH, with DBTH, the hospital, and ourselves about a unit in the city centre, which will be a hub for those health services. And that's a catalyst for broader regeneration in the Waterdale part of Doncaster. So that's going to come through in the next few weeks, and that is another contributor to that neighbourhood health kind of ethos that's been set out in the 10-year plan. So yeah, absolutely. And we'll learn from Barnsley as well. Been over to Barnsley and trying to take the best from that.
Thank you. We're almost coming to the end of what we regard as on notice questions, because we've provided those to you. I think probably as a last comment, I think there's probably a lot of untapped. We've mentioned two things there. 200 people in one, 130 in mine. I think there's a lot of untapped potential out there.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what we need to do. Because if you do bring people together and give them a focus, believe you me, they will do it. And I think part of the borough strategy, I don't know how much of it sort of focuses on that, unleashing the potential of the residents. But it's something that possibly we could make it a potential thing. And make it ward specific, and give us the opportunity as ward members to really release that potential, really. You know, I think that's something, it's just occurred to me that people have got to start understanding they can do a lot for themselves as well, and there's a lot of benefits and rewards in that. You know, and we've mentioned 2 projects that have involved over 300 people, and I think that's something that we need to certainly look forward to. Definitely talk about it again. Any more questions from the committee before I open the floor? Because we have got time for that now, and I did promise everyone if we wanted to. Any more questions from the committee before we do that? All I'll ask is same format, please. If you've got a question, just raise your hand, ask the question, and then certainly you get a chance for a supplementary as well. If there are no questions, then obviously we'll move on to the next stage of the meeting. But please just raise your hand now if you've got any questions for the panel, and it's over to you.
Yeah, you say you've got a strategy for 2021 to 2030. We're halfway stage now. Are you hitting, when you set it off, are you hitting the target for 2025? Is what you planned coming to fruit in regards what you had in mind to do?
So it's a mixed thing. So if you recall on one of the slides, I put up that table. That was just one example of 6 tables in the annual report. They show different things. So some things, our outcome measures, are showing improvement, narrowing the gap to the national, really good 5-year trend. Some of those things are not doing those. And so I suppose some things are doing what we hoped, some things are not doing what we hoped. And that's part of why we do that annual report every year, so that we can be very open about this has gone well, and in that annual report list all the things that we've done as well. So all the contributory things, or the projects, or the stuff that we've put together, not just as a council, but as a partnership, what we've done, and along with that information about those outcome measures, so that we can take that kind of rounded assessment. It's very difficult, very rare that everything will be going well, or everything will be going not so well. So it is a mixed picture, but that's why we have our annual report process, which sets all that out.
Yeah, because what I was looking at, what I was going to mention is, did you foresee so many in the town centre, as we see now, main shops are shutting at an high rate? That is not making Doncaster attractive. Are we finding out what is causing these shops, or why are the shops shutting? Because then, if the shops are shutting, like I say, people aren't going to want to come to Doncaster. I know we're building AI buildings or whatever for that, but these shops are shutting. You talk about employment, people are losing their jobs. So what are we doing to try to stem that from continuing? Because every time you come in, there's a shop shutting. That means maybe it's 10, 15 jobs in each shop. So we are actually losing employment as well. What are we doing to try and combat that?
Oh, thank you. Again, really great question. So I think some of this is like global and national trends, because the role of town and city centres is changing, and we know that retail people, we all do it. We all shop online much more, don't we? And we all use our phones to do that. So the nature of retail is absolutely changing. And Doncaster historically has had lots more retail employment than other places have. So when those trends kick in, and they're not just in the last 4 years, but it's been happening probably over a longer period of time, maybe like 10, 15 years. When those trends kick in, because we had more retail than most places, then it's probably affecting us more. In terms of what we're doing about it, I think there's a few things. We have to keep sort of reinventing what the role of a town and a city centre is. And again, we're not alone in that as a city, but that's the challenge we've got. And probably one of the reasons why the city centre is so important, and one of the things in its own right in the borough strategy. In terms of some of the things we're doing, I think we've touched on some of it so far in the discussion. How do you bring people into the city centre for different reasons? Because people, whether we want it to or not, people do tend to shop online now. More so, not only, but more so. So what are we doing to try and make it a place to come? So we just talked about health services as a good example. It's bringing services into the city centre so people can come for another reason, and then that has a positive sort of ripple effect as well. The other one is things like education as well. So we've obviously got the UTC, we've got Hallcross, we've got the college. We want to bring more education in. So again, that brings people and footfall. There is a decision on a second university technical college, which will be directly opposite the one that's there at the moment, where that's been delayed probably since the election. So we're expecting some announcement on that, hopefully positively, but we don't know for sure. That's again going to give us extra footfall if that happens. Culture and heritage, again, we talked about that before. How do we bring people in for different reasons? The gallery, library, and museum is a good example of that. Things like the Festival of Light that I mentioned, the Christmas light switch on Saturday was fantastic. It was pretty full in the market square. So how do we do things differently to bring people in? And the digital tech hubs, again, a key part of that, because it's different kind of jobs. It's not the same as the retail jobs, but different jobs that bring people in. And you're absolutely right about people losing the jobs. And part of our job is to make sure we help people. If they lose the job in, say, in retail or whatever, how do we help them to reskill, retrain to move into other jobs? And we've got teams in the council like the advanced team who work with the job centre and businesses to help to do that. And I think I might be wrong, Al, but I think our employment rate is probably is it still the highest in South Yorkshire in terms of the numbers of people in work? It's still just a bit below national, but it's the highest of all the places in South Yorkshire. So it's kind of, and the type of jobs we've got are changing as well, aren't they? So we've got more out of town business parks, for example, and we're talking about public transport. So making sure that we have that public transport to get people where they need to be is important. And again, it's going to be a forever job, I think, on the city centre. We're going to need to keep reviewing it and keep updating what our plan is. So yeah, there's not one answer to that, but many things that we can do.
Councillor Squire, yeah, okay. That's this side. Move across to this side. Councillor Knight.
If I may please, Chair. Thinking of the city centre, and there's one thing that seems to have been omitted or not been mentioned at all, and that's the Colonnades building that was a prestigious building that still stands with a lot of empty space and not being used or promoted. Can you give us any further on what you might suggest to include the colonnades into what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Knight. Yes, so Colonnades is absolutely, as you say, an important building. It was historically a retail and an office building. We do have a number of businesses who operate from there at the moment. So My Pension Expert are one of the businesses in there. But what, as part of the city centre strategy and the city centre plan, one of the things that is being looked at there is how does that potentially get converted to residential units that would breathe new life into it, bring people into that. And we are in discussions about bringing that to life again, if that makes sense, as a residential unit. That sits partly in the city centre master plan. So we've talked about the city centre strategy, and what we're just in the process of finalising at the moment is a master plan that sort of maps all the different sites in the city centre and talks about what's the potential use or purpose of that site. So that one, for example, we're talking particularly about potentially residential site. And then thinking about waterfront as another example, that's being remediated at the moment. How might that be something that's complementary from a digital assets point of view as well as housing? So trying to make sure that every part of the city centre has a purpose. Obviously, we don't have the money, thinking about Steve's question, we don't have the money to do all that because that's not in our ownership. But when the money becomes available, you can say, oh, well, we think that's the plan for that part of the city, so we can match that funding stream or that opportunity to that site or that particular place. And that's what it's a bit, again, that jigsaw analogy. It's a big jigsaw. How can we put all the pieces in place as we go forward? But it's a really important, because it connects the city gateway, doesn't it, to the civic quarter. So it's a really important sort of part of that journey.
Just on back of sorry, so back of Councillor Knight's thing there, and you referenced it there, Lee. We don't own great swathes of Doncaster to do these things. But if anybody wanted to look on Land Register, they can see actually the council does own them, but they're on massive leases to, I'm not going to say it, even though I really want to, but some of them, would that trigger looking at these leases again? Because it seems that none of them have any break clauses in them.
I think it would be an as and when. So when things come up, we would then look at the purpose. So I think use Colonnades as an example. That is our building. We own that. We've got a number of tenants in it. What we'd then have to think about, if there was, let's say there was an opportunity to redevelop it for housing, we would then look at that at the appropriate time and then make the decision at that time. I think it'd be a horses for courses rather than a blanket view, depending on the site, depending on the opportunity, depending on the strength of the opportunity and whether we had the money to do something. Because like you say, we don't have the money to do everything. A lot of the land and the assets are not owned by us. So again, it's back to that jigsaw. We pick a piece and we focus on that piece because we've got the money and we've got the timing is right to do something.
Thank you. Any more questions? Borough strategy related rather than sort of an OS panel level, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, I was just going to say, just sort of relating really on the back of what we've said over here about the shops closing. One of the most common things that I hear is that people don't feel safe when they come into the city. You know, it's a while since I've parked over the other side, over the market side, probably about 2 months now. And I was in and out of there 3 times in one day, but each time accosted by somebody that wanted to help me use the machine, you know, which I can manage on my own. But it is a common, you know, it's a common thread on social media. It's a common thread when I speak to people, you know, within my constituency, that they don't feel safe. And when people don't feel safe, they won't come in. The shops suffer. The shops close down. You know, there's a massive. It is a domino effect. So if we can make it safer, then we can get more people in. But I think what's really important, rather than trying to bring new people in, i.e. through the digital hub, is to get the people that live here back into the town centre, as opposed to keeping them away.
No, absolutely. And the point about safety, that was Al mentioned the big city conversation. That was the main thing that was on that about safety and security. And there's a number of things that are happening already in place to help with that, and extra investment that was put in 23, 24 or 24, 25 to do that. So we've got more people, more visibility. The police have reorganised their teams to make sure that there's a dedicated city centre team. But on its own, that won't cut it, I guess. And you're absolutely right about how do we get more people to come in from the city. One of the things that's quite interesting through the analysis that we did, the people who felt unsafe were probably not a surprise, were the people who don't use the city centre. The people who do use the city centre did feel safe. So there's something about perceptions and how do we address perceptions. And again, I'll use the example on Saturday night. The Christmas light switch on was amazing. It was rammed. It was a great atmosphere. Families were in there having a really good time. So the more people that are in the city centre, some of the issues. Yes, it is. It's exactly that. Exactly, because you've got more people. A few weeks ago. I was in Manchester, and I didn't feel safe in Manchester. If I'm completely honest, there was the number of people who were rough sleeping. Compared to what you see here, it was a lot more. There were more people, obviously, in Manchester City Centre, but there was a lot of people in doorways bedding down and sleeping. So there's something about perceptions. How do we change that? And we know that some of this is about how we tell more of a positive story about the good things. I use the light switch on as an example, or the Festival of Light last week, so people feel comfortable. So more people that come in, or more they need to come in for other things like health services, then the better it will be. So yeah, it's not an easy challenge, but I think we've got to kind of stick with it and keep trying things and testing things and seeing what works. And the more people who can speak positively about it, then it helps to turn that curve. As I say, if you'd asked people who were there on Saturday night, I'm sure most people would have gone, "Oh, this was great. Really enjoyed it. It was, there was an X Factor, and I can't remember the lady's name, but an X Factor. That's the one. See, I don't watch X Factor, but she was there. It was great. So it's more of those positive things that we can do and bring.
Yeah, changing people's perceptions is very, very difficult. I know I do it for a living, but it is very, very difficult. If we can change that perception, like you said, then we can get more people in. Well, thank you.
Time for one last question. Does anybody want to take one last question over?
Yeah, sorry, this is going back to the heritage of Doncaster. Can you let me know what's happening with St James's Baths and the fact that Harrogate have retained theirs? I mean, this is probably one of the last actual heritage building that Doncaster's got. Is it your intention to knock it down?
Definitely not. So it's been, I'll be really honest, it's been difficult with St James's Baths because we did have a private sector developer who was going to turn it into apartments and preserve and regenerate it. We've had to put that back out to the market. I don't know if it's actually gone out yet, but it will be if it's not already. I think it has, to see what interest there is there, but it's absolutely not the intention to knock it down. Absolutely not. One of the things that we're trying to do much more is to preserve, because that's what people said, preserve and bring back into use some of our heritage buildings. It's interesting, so colleagues were meeting with the Arts Council the other day, and they're really interested in working with us to bring more National Lottery resources in to support some of this stuff, and that's a key part of our city centre strategy that we talked about to do just that. So yeah, it's that these things are quite difficult sometimes, aren't they? They take a while sometimes because you've got to be quite deliberate about how you look after it, 'cause it's listed as well, I think, isn't it? The St James's Baths. So, but it's definitely not the intention to knock it down.
Councillor Jackson, Frank, if I can just say something, these are really good questions for your panel.
Yeah.
Really good questions for your panel, and you're the chair of that panel.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
I can just get the background.
Yes, no, I understand. And obviously, you're going to get the opportunity to do that amongst your panel. So rather than Borough, is that okay? Thank you. Is it Borough strategy related? Yep, thank you. I trust you on that.
Sorry. In support of, we mentioned about the feeling of insecure about walking town centres, or people that don't come that feel they can't feel as though they do feel or do or don't feel secure. But I think you have one incident and it goes on this machine and it goes to too many people, and it goes to too many people and it creates a wrong impression. And it isn't always correct what is put on these things. And it's creating this little bit of fear that we don't necessarily need to feel.
No worries.
It's
Thank you.
exaggerating.
Thank you. I was thinking it was going to be a question, but never mind. That's sound. So have you got any, before we move on to the formalities of recommendations, have you got any closing statements you would like to make as officers now? Good. I'll now move on to my colleague here and now move on to the more formal aspect of the meeting. Right, moving on to, thank you very much for all the questions. We've gleaned a lot of information, which is what these meetings are for. But moving on to the recommendations, it is recommended that the members of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee endorse the approach taken in the Doncaster Delivering Together refresh process. Does the committee endorse that approach? Yes. Yep. Is this seconded by a member of the committee, please? Thank you. Seconded by... And does the committee agree to endorse that? Thank you very much. Review and comment on the proposed actions and the framework used. Does the committee feel that it has considered these during the meeting today?
Yeah.
Is this seconded? Someone other than Rebecca? Councillor Cumming?
I can second it. I don't know if we're getting to the proposal part.
Oh, no worries.
Okay, so obviously, yeah, okay.
Thank you. Does the committee agree? Thank you. And finally, does the committee make recommendations to inform the final version of the DDT refresh? And yeah, move on to my colleague.
I've got one of these.
Oh, you've got one as well.
Firstly, to reflect the points and discussed in the meeting, the chair has given authority to send a letter to the mayor about the discussions held in the meeting.
That's proposed. Anybody second that? That I can send a letter to the... Thank you very much, Councillor Jackson.
Chair, I'll just say what I'll do. I'll make sure we include the key comments from today and the many questions that you've asked. I'll get that in there.
That's all right.
Yeah, go
on. Secondly, are there any recommendations that wish to be proposed to inform the final version of the DDT refresh? And now we're moving on to...
Thanks,
what
Chair.
would you like to propose?
Yeah, I'd like to propose to include information from the care leavers as part of the strategy as well.
Brilliant. And a seconder for that, please. Thank you, Councillor Jackson. There we go. Does the committee agree? Yep, good. Yep. If there are no more recommendations, then what we'll do is move forward and close the meeting.
I've got one more.
Oh, have you got one more?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, an update. Before we close the meeting, we'll have an update.
Sorry, the next item's just for the work plan and the forward plan. So I'm just going to highlight really a next meeting is the next finance and performance report. So that's in December. Following Christmas period, then we'll have the corporate plan as mentioned by Lee and Alan, and also the budget, and then that'll be ongoing work for OSMC, and then the other panel will have some work. But also just to go back to some of the issues mentioned today in the discussion, I know that the Communities Environment Panel as a Crime and Disorder Committee will be looking at holding to account the Safer Doncaster Partnership, and also Region and Housing, they'll be doing some work in their March meeting about future developments. So just wanted to add that, Chair.
That's fantastic, thank you. And then I'm able to now conclude by saying thank you very much for coming, everybody. Thank you for all your input, and I'll now close this meeting. Thank you.